Welcome everyone to Massey College and the launch of Kim Kierans' book, Journalism for the Public Good. And I'm delighted to see so many people here to come to this wonderful event. And I know that Kim holds a special place in the hearts of many people here at Massey. And so it's delightful to have this thing that is something you worked on here being presented here. My name is Jonathan Rose. I'm the acting principal of Massey College, and I'd like to acknowledge that Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous peoples have lived. It is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship towards the land and the great privilege we have to work on this land. Now please let me introduce our host for this evening, Noor Javed. Noor is an award-winning journalist with the Toronto Star who covers suburban municipal politics and stories reflective of Toronto's diverse communities. In 2024, Noor was part of a team of journalists at the Toronto Star and the Narwhal who won the Michener Award, something the book is all about, for their coverage of the Ontario Greenbelt scandal. Their work was instrumental in forcing the Ontario government to reverse its unpopular decision of opening up environmentally sensitive land for development. The team also won a National Newspaper Award this year. In 2011, Noor won her first National Newspaper Award for her analysis and reporting on Toronto's booming condo market. She also has been a finalist for several awards from the Canadian Journalism Foundation and the Canadian Hillman Prize. As one of the first visible Muslim journalists in Canadian media when she entered in the field 2 decades ago, Noor has worked tirelessly to diversify the industry for the next generation. She's mentored dozens of journalists and established a financial scholarship, now in its 3rd year, to encourage young Canadian Muslims to pursue careers in journalism. Noor is an alumna of the University of Toronto from Trinity College, where she received a bachelor's degree in human biology. She also has a master's degree in journalism from Western University. When she's not out chasing stories, Noor can be found chasing after her 3 children, who are 14, 11, and 6. Please welcome Noor Javed.
Hello, and welcome to the book launch for Kim Kierans' book, Journalism for the Public Good, the Michener Awards at 50. So Kim kindly invited me to do a short introduction for her launch, as this year, as you just heard, I was fortunate to be part of the team from the Toronto Star, which together with the Narwhal won the Michener Award for our investigation into the province's decisions to open up the Greenbelt lands for development. You might have heard about it. So I'm honored that she invited me to be part of her book launch, which she described to me over coffee a few weeks ago as her love letter to journalism. That night in Ottawa in June, when we received the Michener at a beautiful ceremony at the residence of the Governor General, I spoke up about the power of good investigative journalism, and here is some of what I said, which is why I think she asked me to come today. Our win was not just a win for our respective publications, but a win for journalism in itself. It reminded us of the power of public service journalism. It reminded us that good investigative journalism can still wake up a public that seems more and more detached from the work that we do. It reminded us that together, the media and an engaged public, it can be a powerful force for change. And I will be the first to admit that I had forgotten this over the years. After nearly 2 decades of being a journalist, I had become quite disillusioned. I had lost faith in the impact of journalism. And here I was, writing exclusive after exclusive on the Greenbelt, developer deals, the attendees at Doug Ford's daughter's wedding, but nothing seemed to make a difference. The government continued to deflect each scandal, and the status quo continued. And sadly, over the years, I realized I had also started to lose faith in the public's interest in our work, and I doubted if they still cared about our efforts to shed light on the truth. One evening, months after our first investigation, I called up a colleague, dejected and burnt out, and I vented to her, why have our investigations not made a difference? Why hasn't the government apologized or stepped down? Why did it seem like no one cared? She told me comforting words that I needed to hear at that time. She reminded me that our work had made an impact. We had done a public service, And even if nothing changed, at least we had put our findings out on the public record, and no one could take that away from us. But something changed in 2023. The continual news coverage on questionable relationships between the government officials and developers started to break through to the public. There were protests, letter-writing campaigns, and the shadow of the Greenbelt decision followed government officials wherever they went. And finally, after a weekend out in the farm country, usually considered friendly territory for government officials, the officials were questioned about the Greenbelt by constituents while protesters stood by. And it's at that point that the government had no choice but to relent and reverse their decision. And it was this beautiful and rare moment when journalism and the public joined forces to fight in the public interest. And it was a moment that was recognized and appreciated by the Michener this year. This moment has also reaffirmed for me why I joined the industry 20 years ago and got into journalism, and has really given me renewed hope for the future of this industry. And that's why I truly believe that the Michener Award is so important. While the awards need journalists to continue their hard-hitting investigative traditions, the industry also needs the Michener Award to espouse this high standard that compelled us to enter into the profession in the first place. And as we see turbulent times ahead for the media landscape in Canada, the role of the Michener Awards to encourage us to continue our efforts to hold leaders accountable for their decisions will be more important than ever. So with that, I just want to introduce the two stars of tonight. Of course, we have our author, Kierans, who is a senior fellow and senior resident at Massey College, where she conducts communication workshops and produces the JCR, a Massey podcast, a platform for graduate students to share their research and projects through interviews and commentary. She is an English professor emerita in the School of Journalism, Writing and Publishing at the University of King's College, Halifax, where she has taught for 24 years after a career in print and broadcast journalism. She has trained internationally and was a visiting professor at the Asian Center for Journalism at Ateneo de Manila University for 15 years. She is joined this evening in conversation by one of Canada's most notable journalists, Anna Maria Tremonti, who is an award-winning journalist who has traveled Canada and the world covering societal change, political upheaval, and armed conflict. She worked in radio and television for decades with postings in Berlin, London, Jerusalem, and Washington. She was the founding host of CBC Radio's flagship current affairs program, The Current, for 17 years. Her latest podcast, Welcome to Paradise, explores her own story of intimate partner violence and the long-term consequences of such abuse. Her long-form conversation podcast, More, was released by CBC in early 2020. So thank you again, Kim, for inviting me. Congratulations on your book, and I hope everyone enjoys the talk.
Thank you, Noor. And
Yes, thank you.
before we begin, I just want to ask how many Michener Award winners are here tonight? Want to raise your hands?
And those who have been nominated as well, finalists.
Yes, and
Finalists.
finalists. How many?
Yeah.
Really high. Come on, Rob Cribb, put that hand up. We want to see you. Anyway, we will appreciate you even more as we continue this conversation. So thank you for your work ahead of time as we go. This book, such a rich history of the Michener Awards, but also of investigative journalism and journalism in general in Canada, and a bit of a chronicle of the struggle to pay for journalism in Canada as well, Kim. It's all there.
Yeah, it is all there, because you can't separate one from the other. You have the Michener Awards Foundation. When most people, when you mention that, they say, what? What's that? And then if I say Pulitzer Prize, they went, oh. And I say it's Canada's version of the Pulitzer Prize, but we don't know it. We're so Canadian, aren't we? It took it as its mission, in fact, to recognize journalism that had impact, that made public policy changes, that made a difference in the lives of Canadians across the country and in communities as well. And then, as it's going up and down, the funding, of course, as the markets change, as the industry changes, you see the funding going up and down, and the interest in media outlets to put money into that. Really, you can almost, it's like a barometer.
So remind us, how did this start?
It started with the formation of a group called a journalism group together. what was it? The Federation of Journalist Clubs, and they were trying to bring together journalists from across the country. And they thought, well, why don't we have something to have a national profile? And so it was Bill McPherson that came up with this idea. Let's have an award like the Pulitzer Prize. And he went and he sent a letter, to Rideau Hall. He said, let's make it the highest, the best. And he sent a letter off, and Roland Michener was Governor General, and surprisingly agreed, because of course it fit with Roland Michener. Roland Michener was Governor General. He was Speaker of the House for a bit. He was an MP in St. Paul's riding. He was a public servant and really believed that in the role of journalism as a pillar of democracy, that if we have a bar to set, then other media will, in fact, will also try to rise to it.
And it focuses on public service journalism that actually has a tail, like something, it's not solely that the information is out there, it's that it changes something.
It has to have impact within a calendar year. So when we think about the impact that Noor spoke about in her story, it had impact in that year. And so all the stories have had some sort of impact that continues on.
And like the story she was describing, sometimes these stories actually go on for certainly the investigation and the work goes on for years before it even reaches that point.
Absolutely. There's always, huge amounts. When you think about a story back in 1975 about Grassy Narrows, which was, of course, in the news today, it was when they started to work on that, it had already been stories for 5 years, and they were just doing a checkup, just seeing what's going on there. And ever since then, its story has not gone away. But it's the persistence of reporters like Jim Rankin, Rob Cribb, who are in this room, that keep coming up and saying, we're not going to let a story die, we're going to keep following it. Because just because we won an award doesn't mean that it's fixed. The problem is not fixed. It needs a journalist. If anything, this book is in fact an argument for the necessity and the importance of investigative journalism and funding it.
So talk to me about the significance of these awards to Canadian journalism as a whole over the years. What did you learn as you looked at this and also as you saw it over the years? So
I went in, when I started writing this, I thought it was going to be a history of an awards group that gave out awards. And then I was so compelled by the journalism and the interviews I did with people who, in fact, have been in the field for years and years. And what I found is that there is this need for persistence, that they persisted. I think about a story that I'm just trying to think of, there's so many stories, it's hard to believe, which one? Let me just take a peek here.
Take a peek at the book, because
Yeah.
I want you to actually talk about the ones that stay with you. There are so many.
Oh, yeah, there are. Again, there's, is there anyone here from the Manitoulin Expositor? Hey, there's, Rick McCutcheon and Peter Carter. So back in 1980, I've got it here, 82, they had already spent 10 years working on this story of suicide in their community of 10,000 people. So we're not talking about a big community, a community that government could easily ignore. And they spent 10 years on it, and they just kept at it. And they received a Michener nomination because they had got a help phone line, and they'd evidence that in fact suicides had been prevented because of this phone line. And they came to Ottawa, to Rideau Hall, the place of the Governor General, and they came, and Peter tells a lovely story about how he didn't think he was going to. He just thought it was just a nice nod to the weekly newspapers, the first weekly newspaper, and he went to the bathroom. And ran into John Fraser, who said, "Do you have your speech ready?" And he said, "Ha ha ha," and then. But these are the kinds of things that happen, and then afterwards, the Globe and Mail went to interview them about the story, and Rick says, Yeah, it's a story, but I'm only as that story's gone. I need to keep myself performing, and there's still an independent community newspaper, independently owned community newspaper, and there's a lot to be congratulated in the work that they do.
Tell us the story of another investigation award winner that just, blew you away.
Well, I think one of the things early on in this research, I had an interview with Gillian Cosgrove. I don't know if Gillian's here today. I had an interview with Gillian, and Gillian really set the tone for how I approached this book. It's the story. She went undercover at a girls' sort of reformatory school for teenagers, and she reported on the horrors of what it was like, what those girls endured, and when you read it, you'll be deeply moved by her reporting, and then she won the Michener Award, and as she said to me anyway, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Gillian, that you went on your merry way, that you thought you had made changes, and the changes had happened. And then some 40 years later, she realized she got in touch with the group of survivors from this Marion Hall, got in touch with her, and she discovered that she had made changes, but they weren't lasting changes, that they needed more persistence. And because of the story that Gillian told me, I started tracking stories, the Michener stories, and I started tracking where are they now, who is following them, and the reporters that are doing this are following it, and that's still an ongoing story, isn't it, Gillian? That you've had. The story is still ongoing.
Very much so.
Yeah.
50 years later.
Yeah.
We launched a lawsuit. I'll stand up. We launched a lawsuit in Quebec Superior Court, 4 years ago, and it's a class action suit, and they're asking damages. It goes back to 1950, so it's a long time back. A lot of potential victims, and they're asking $500,000 per person, and damages and lack of therapy, and on and on and on and on. So it could be as big as the residential school is.
Yeah.
Just recently, a few weeks ago, a new development, in the original class action, the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis were left out because they have a slightly different system, so legally they left them out. And they also left out the juvenile delinquents. They just had the protection cases. So a few weeks ago, we found someone who had been in Shawbridge. He was a First Nations man, and I think he lives up in Temiskaming, somewhere in Quebec. And he's 75 or 80. And so finally, after all these many years, he may get some justice too. And then we launched the Métis and First Nations and Inuit. So it's ongoing to this day, something that started when I was 22 years old, and I'm 72 now.
Bravo.
Yeah.
And can I just ask you a question, Gillian? When you went undercover, if I've got this right, you actually did that because you hit a wall and trying to report something.
Well, yeah.
What happened?
I knocked on the prison door. No, it all started when I was assigned to the social welfare beat, and knowing nothing about social welfare, I went to social workers on the street and said, what is the biggest problem in Quebec? And finally I came across a man who said that children's prisons still exist. And I said, no, they don't, not in Quebec. This is modern age, it's not the Plessy age. He said, go and see. So I went and knocked on the prison door like a little dupe that I was, and this big burly guard said, you can't come in here. And I said, it's taxpayers' money. I want to see what's going on in front of you. We're all paying for it. Why can't I see what's going on in front? And I had been told that there was abuse going on there, so I went to my managing editor and said, can I go undercover? And he said, no. You always have to approach first and be turned down repeatedly before you go to any extreme measures. And I said, well, I believe that abuse has been going on in there, and I think it justifies going undercover. So we had this long ethical debate, and eventually I called the prison warden, and she said, again, the public is not allowed in here. And I used the argument, it's taxpayers' money. And she said, I'm sorry, we're not allowed in here. So I went undercover. But I was groomed. I was told what to say and what to do, because if I'd just gone in as pretending to be me, I wouldn't have got in, because one of the first questions was, are you prepared to beat children? And I kind of crossed my things and said, in some special circumstances, and I got the job.
Anyway, it was a story for me that really set the tone when I talked to other people, because I asked them, you won the Michener, you had this change, this immediate change, the government put money in, there was laws changed, but now reflecting back, what does it seem like? So you really did have a huge effect on how the book was shaped.
But you're so right, Kim. I kicked myself because I should have gone back to check. Of course, I went to the Montreal Star and then on to CTV, W5, and CBC and all other places, and I just assumed that good-willed people, well-meaning people, would change the law, and they effectively very little happened.
Yeah.
What was interesting in your book, when I read it for the first time, is that it inspired other journalists to go check in their provinces and see if the same thing was going on behind closed doors, behind locked bars. And in some cases, as you showed in your book, it was.
Yeah, and that's the long tail of journalism, how it's so important that that we follow through on things, and this is my big concern is with the cutbacks and that there aren't journalists like Jim, Rob, and others who are doing that, who are following up and continuing on to pursue a story even when you hit those walls. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And another lesson there in fighting for story, fighting with editors for a story, too. Journalism is evolving, how we gather information, how we deliver it, how it's perceived. So against that backdrop, why do the values of the Michener matter? Talk to us about how this award created so many decades ago still can speak to us.
Well, the values of the Michener are, in fact, that we put the public and the public interest first, and that the journalism that's done is done not for self-interest, not for your advertisers, but in fact done for your community. And I think that's really one of the most important things. And also because it's connected to the Governor General of Canada and an impartial body, it has a luster to it, it has an impartiality to it in the sense that it is not an award that's given by peers to peers. It's an arm's length process that, in fact, really does value the independence of media and the independence of the journalists like Noor and the Narwhal and the Star to tell those stories, and really does. And it's also a process which takes risks. In fact, I remember when I was the chief judge for many years on the Michener Foundation, and I remember the year that the Toronto Star's Rob Ford story came to us. It had not received a single nomination at the National Newspaper Awards. That entry, not a single nomination, and there was quite a debate at the meeting, but in the end, it was we decided to pick that as the Michener winner, and there was everybody who's a finalist is a winner, to be honest, but we have to select. And I remember that night, John Hondrick getting up and just shouting for joy because the newspaper had been threatened, the reporters had been threatened, and the financial viability of that reporter, but there was a certain courage in the act of saying, yes, this is important because you were able to report without fear.
So when you looked at them ongoing, did you find some similarities then in the difficulty the journalists, the award winners and the nominees had in just getting those stories forward and staying on them?
Yes, huge amount of difficulty. You had people who were, pulling advertising in a time when you're in deep financial trouble. That's a difficulty for a newspaper. How do you? It's expensive. It's very expensive to have an investigation, to actually put reporters, pull them off the beat when newsrooms are shrinking, when they're shrinking down, and yet you're saying, oh, I'm going to take you off, and you're allowed to have 6 weeks, a month to go and travel. Who has a travel budget anymore? But this is the kind of thing that investigative journalists have, and as the financial situation and the business models fail, that becomes more acute, so the Michener Award is actually a nice thing to get, because now Noor can go and say, I've got another story, and because she's won this Michener Award, it gives her a certain kind of money in the bank, if we want to call it that.
Is that true?
Well, I think that Jim was the one that raised that with me, that he's able to leverage a Michener win to continue on stories.
There was a lot of politics behind the scenes with the Michener Awards as well. It was, tell us some stories.
Yes, so there was a lot of politics behind it. I think that governance at any institution is a big issue, and certainly as the Michener Awards Foundation, the group that administers the award, grew, certainly the tensions became more evident as to whether we're going to be a modern board, and we're going to grow with the times, or if we're going to stay in a closed model of governance. So there was a certain tension about that, and I think you're sort of alluding to in particular anything.
Oh, well, the rivalry too.
Yeah.
Not enough.
Yes. So that one was interesting, because the Michener Award Foundation had been operating, established, and then the Canadian Journalism Foundation decided to form, and it's a Toronto-based group. But they at one point wanted to take us over, wanted to sort of say, let's have a partnership. And the Michener Award, which was poor because everyone was volunteer, nobody got paid. We relied on donations from the industry, and you can all imagine what that's like. As things contracted, the donations contracted. There were times when Roland Michener dug in his pocket and wrote a check for $1,000. It really had those moments, but the board actually had this existential crisis. Are we going to join with a group, and the Canadian Journalism Foundation was moneyed. It had a lot of important people who were prepared to back it. It was also in its early years, there was a view that it was very business focused. It wanted to, as one of my interviewees said, it wanted to make sure that journalists behaved and told the right story. And that was in the early days, and that's not the case now. I want to make that very clear. So as a result, the Michener Foundation said no to the sort of overture, and went for sort of genteel poverty instead. And meanwhile, and then they found the Canadian Journalism Foundation, but went on to do wonderful things that it does here in Toronto. But there was always that lingering threat, are they going to gobble us up? And so that plays itself out over the years. And I think we're probably grown past that, or the group is. I'm not part of it anymore, but have grown past that.
How vulnerable is the organization today?
Not very vulnerable right now, because, one of the lovely things in doing this book, I interviewed David Johnson, former Governor General, and he has the Rideau Hall Foundation, and it's a foundation that has a democratic focus to it. And in the interview, he said, "You should, join with us. One of our projects." And so I took that and brought it to the president, Alan L. Knott, who ran with it. So now we have an association with the Rideau Hall Foundation, and they are raising money for us. They're well funded. They're very supportive with their communications and all that kind of thing. So I'd say it's probably the most secure it has ever been in its 50-some years. Bravo. Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts a little bit about this moment in time with journalism, how it is not only under threat on a budgetary front, but and the fragmentation, but even in public perception, and looking at an award that is all about journalism and the public good, at a time when so many people accuse journalism of being anything but. I'm just wondering how you see things and how you see a way forward.
Wow, if I had the answer to that. Well, I mean, I do think that we're trying, I think journalists and journalism organizations are trying hard. The very act of journalism, I think it will remain. The act of, people will produce stories, some by off the side of their desk or in one way or another. The organizations through which they're publishing them, the platforms, it's all up and down. I see Kelly Tohill here, who's an expert on the business of journalism, and she may have some answers for you afterwards. I do think, though, that we have to. Journalism never paid for itself. I mean, advertising paid for it, subscriptions paid for it, and we're seeing organizations doing different models. So you have All Nova Scotia, which is a heavily locked down online site that's niche and subscriptions, and it's doing well. You see things like La Presse, which has become a charity where you can give donations to it, and it is still a majority of its money comes still from advertising, but the Quebec scene is unique, and I don't know that we could replicate that in Canada. I know the Star tried to, and it didn't work out so well. But then there's partnerships. So I look over at Rob Cribb, who is always partnering. I look here at Noor, who partnered with Narwhal. So there's partnerships so that established media and newer media can work together to produce journalism that is of value and really has an impact. How we convince people that that what we're doing matters, I think, is by being out there, by having engagement with the readers, transparency. If we're moving to use to AI, we should be transparent about how we're using it, why we're using it. I was at 2 days ago, the Reporters Without Borders had a seminar, and it was about journalism post-Bill C-18. And it's online if you want to go watch it. And it's really interesting because one of the things they were talking about was, in fact, that we will have some sort of, subsidization is part of, I think, the mix. But the important thing is to be transparent and get your audience is involved. So you've got cooperatives happening, sort of there's independent media cooperatives are joining up together to share their stories. There's new things happening. Right now, it's such an unhappy time, though, isn't it, for a lot of us? I think Monty said to me, I'm really discouraged, the level of discourse, but I think we should not be discouraged. I think we've got to go out there with 2 fists flying and really fight for journalism, fight for what you've spent your whole career, Anna Maria, doing, truth-telling in some way or another.
I'm encouraged by the creation of something like the Narwhal, for example, like people finding ways to do the journalism that they think matters, and then, I haven't looked at their books, but they're so successful in what they do and how they partner. And I'm wondering, you have spoken to a lot of students over the decades too. Do you see? How do you talk to them about this kind of thing? Are you seeing new ideas bubbling up?
I think a lot of them are drawn to the new startups. They want to be part of something new, and they should be. That's where they belong. They should be there because they're the ones that are digitally native. They're the ones that will be the storytellers. So I'm really thinking that the way the stories will continue to be told, the platforms may be different, and how we access them. We may not access them on trees. I don't know, none of my children really read a paper, but they read a paper, but on their phones, and they'll read information there. So I think that's where we're going.
We're going to keep up the discussion, but if you have a question as we talk, maybe we'll break the rules and we won't leave them all till the end.
So Alyssa has the microphone if you want to ask a question. But you think about startups such as the investigative. There's this the Investigative Journalism Bureau partnership with Dalalana. There is the Institute for Investigative Journalism that's doing a lot of data journalism. There's a lot of things out there that are happening. We just don't know about them yet, and it's all fragmented in a kind of unhappy way especially for those of us who are a little bit older. Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob Cribb.
Thanks so much for this, and thanks for the book, Kim. It's amazing. I'm hoping you might gossip a bit. Of all of the Michener ceremonies I went to, the weirdest one was when, what's her first name? Payette was the Governor General. Julie Payette was the Governor General.
Yes.
And it was weird because she had been in the press, and she was there to hand out an award to journalists, and she appeared to hate journalists. Can you tell that story about Julie Payette and what that was like?
I should really get John Fraser to tell that story. But I mean, you put yourself in her shoes. She is Governor General of Canada. Then all of a sudden, she gets the bad press about her past comes to light. And this is not new. And in the book, you'll see that Jean Sauvé had a hard time, Michael Jean had a hard time, and they just rose to the occasion and did their duty. And they sort of, if they didn't like the media at a certain time, they didn't show it. And I think it was far more difficult for Madame Payette to actually reconcile how she felt about the bad publicity and to her role as Governor General. And I think that was the big problem there. And so she refused, for instance, still rankles the Globe and Mail that during those years none of the citations or the awards were signed by the Governor General. That's first and only time. They were just not signed. David Walmsley, get him talking about it. And things like coming and going. So she didn't buy in the first few years. Near the end, I think she was warming up, and that's when the Inside Rideau Hall came out, and then she was gone. Yeah. But the relationship with the Governor General is very important to the Michener Award because it says to journalists that what you're doing is higher than just a particular moment in doing good journalism, but it's recognized by the state as being important to democracy and to how we live as Canadians in society.
Any more gossip?
John Fraser.
First of all, thank you so much for everything that you are for this book, for what you are to Massey College. You've been a friend of this place for a very long time, and it looks good on you. What is one of the most intriguing developments the last few years is government getting involved in helping to save local journalism. It's very controversial because if you'd asked a publisher, any publisher in this country, 20 years ago about government help, they would have screamed rape. I mean, something horrible. Now they're sort of touching their forelocks and saying por favor the whole time. So the risk always was that somehow government would try dictating the terms. I don't believe, from the perspective of where I work at the National News Media Council, that that's a real concern. I think the CBC is great proof of that. If the government ever tried to redirect the CBC, we'd hear about it first from the CBC, and I think the same would happen with journalism. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, of all these years at the Michener, whether that is a concern to you.
I want to speak a bit to this. Since 2019, we've lost trust in media because of the labor tax credit. I'm sorry, but we can go back to the postal subsidies that publishers begged pre-Confederation, have been receiving ever since. And I haven't got the tally, but I'd love to compare it to the how much subsidies the Quebec dairy farmers get. I suspect it'll rank up there. And you also have, the CBC was founded in the 30s by a conservative government, and it is a subsidy. I worked for the CBC for more than 20 years. No one ever told me what to do, and should they ever, it would have. You're right. It would have led the news, and throughout. There's been policies. There's been programs to help media through the government, the media fund. There's been all that. So you see that running through my narrative as well, and journalism was in trouble back in 1970. If you look at the commissions, first the Davey Commission, and he said, look, competition, there's just too much concentration. We need to keep people independent. 10 years later, it was Tom Kent Commission. Again, he says, competition, he said, is virtually dead. And now we're in a state where, is competition virtually dead? One newspaper is owned by has most of the papers across country now. They just bought Saltwire, and they're owned by a hedge fund in the States. 98%. We should be out protesting in the streets, quite frankly, about the state of our media. Did I answer that? No? Pardon?
I think perhaps the trick is to keep journalists being belligerent and independent so that they push back at perhaps the corporate bosses who have to answer to whoever.
Yeah.
But that becomes a struggle as well.
Well, especially when there are fewer and fewer and fewer of them, and out there, it's more difficult. It's really more difficult.
At the same time, you make the point. It's we are talking about something that is age-old, the telling of stories, the search for accountability, the quest for truth. And yet in the book, we are reminded again and again how much in the publishing of information and whatever else is published, and published or broadcast, that the money toward that is always the one that has to be fought for. It's a question of will, is it not? Of who's got,
Yeah, it's choice. Yeah, they choose. And also now that many of these companies, the journalism arm is just one small aspect of a larger company business, and it's down at the bottom of the heap. It's the, the Globe is lucky because it has a benefactor who is prepared to, put money into it. And so, but not all media are like that.
At the same time, we see we see independent doc makers, we see independent publishers, who are going after perhaps one or two threads of an area to cover. So we see that constant morphing of journalism. And I want your thoughts on that too. Like, where do you see it going? What worries you?
I'm worried about people that give up. I'm worried about, I know several documentary makers who just said, I can't tell stories from the African Nova Scotia community anymore because trying to raise the money to do a documentary is impossible. I spend all my time trying to raise money and no time actually doing, filming and story development. That's what, and that's not an exception. That's across the country. And that's worrisome. That's very worrisome. It's worrisome when young, talented freelancers are having a hard time finding someone who will take their stories and pay them the value that those stories and the research that they put into it that's worth. That's worrisome.
Have you seen journalism elsewhere that has dealt with this in a more successful way, or in a way that is worth emulating, or aspects of it?
Well, a lot of the journalism that would be funded have some relation to government funding, in other countries, but the cooperatives certainly are. There's some cooperatives. the Quebec media have really gone big on not-profit. And so they've formed cooperatives of media cooperatives, so they may have 8 or 10 papers that work together and share their publications in a region. And so that's I think a wonderful thing. Ed Greenspan's right there, and he knows a lot about this because I listened to his that session 2 days ago.
I'm just doing the Jim ranking two-way thing.
But yeah,
You want to comment on that, Ed?
yeah. Because
Want
you've
to give
got
us
lots
your
to
thoughts
say.
on this?
Yeah.
I was taking a picture.
We know,
No,
but you're,
I want you to,
What did you want me to say? I wasn't listening, I was taking a picture.
oh,
we were talking about the future of media, and you had made some really good points on the, in that webinar I sat in on for the Reporters Without Borders 2 days ago.
I made a good point about the future of media.
Yes.
Which point did I make? I made the point that you talked about transparency.
Yeah, you made the transparency. You made the need for partnerships. You talked about the future and what needs to be done.
Right, okay. Well, I think policy has possibly taken us as far as it's going to take us, particularly the way the political stars are aligned. And now it's time for us to figure out how to innovate. And some people are doing some really interesting things, as you were saying, Kim. But we don't really know a lot about them. The Micheners are going to have a little gathering of innovative people in the next month or so, and then we'll publish some stuff out of that to try to figure out, what's working in different places. You mentioned La Presse has been very interesting, very interesting. There's a lot of small operations across the country that are doing things. We have no sight lines, like the PA Herald was bought by its workers a few years ago by its newsroom, and nobody really knows how that's doing, but there'll be, we'll find out a little bit about that. But that's where we got to go. If we're not using the money to figure out how to re-stand on our own 2 feet, we're probably going to be in a lot of trouble again.
Yeah.
I think the lines are blurring as well. I mean, obviously, I worked for a big broadcaster, the CBC, but the lines blur, the print, the digital, the broadcast, the radio, television, it's all blurred, and everybody is doing different things. And now, if you have an iPhone, you can do a lot on your own. You can do a podcast. It doesn't mean you can get it out there and delivered, but there are just so many different places. So where do up-and-coming journalists go for those touchstones, to work with the people who've already done it, to learn from others?
Well, there's still, there's still jobs, entry jobs in various media. So they are learning from there. There's also a lot of hyper-local going on. So there's the Journalism Initiative program, which is, puts journalists in underserved areas that they can get their start from there for a year or so. There's things like that that are happening. But I think you really need to think about a strategy, and I'm glad to hear that the Michener Foundation is working on that to actually have a strategy to actually provide a way forward to let us think about this and talk about it. We're not talking about this enough. Canada Land's doing some work in it. There's some other places. Joey in Hamilton is by himself, cranking out municipal news. We've got the New York Times in Sackville, New Brunswick. The Tartan Press that runs 2 little things in New Brunswick. So there's things happening. They're not getting money from anybody. They're just doing it as little labors of love, and they're hoping to get advertising along the way. But we don't have a culture of philanthropy either. We don't have someone who's, there's no Daddy Warbucks in Canada that's going to come and save journalism, so we've got to save ourselves.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Kim, for the book. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's not been, it's just, I just put about 2 copies, one for Peter, one for myself, on the way in, so look forward to that. And thank you so much for taking this on. It was just an observation about the relationship between government and media, but you made reference to subsidy of postal rates and that applies, it's a 150-year-old thing, it's applied to rural papers with a certain circulation, with a paid circulation. It's quite specific, and I don't think there's that many of us that receive that anymore. But it's really useful for the purpose for which it was intended at the time of Confederation. Well, the Conservative government, Mr. Harper, undertook to sort of de-link that from postal subsidies to sort of, buy yourself a new truck or car, or take a holiday. And I wondered, and still do, if this was in an effort to make this unpopular, publicly unpopular, so they would have an excuse to walk away from it at some time. Heaven help us if who becomes the prime minister in a year's time on that front. Anyway, that's just an observation. I would also say that there's lots there's a whole lot of print startups, mostly on the bones of where Metroland had sort of pulled out, holus bolus almost a year ago, and there's that void is being quickly filled.
Yeah, so I think, it's kind of like nature. You can't, it will spring up. It will spring up in some ways, and there will be people to fight for journalism. I'm looking at Joan O'Callaghan. Her husband Patrick was a huge fighter for freedom of speech and was really a huge supporter of the Michener Foundation over the year. There's Tim Kotchoff here, who in fact, a lot of this book, I have to tell you, a lot of this book, the research came from his website, a historic website that he developed over many years as a volunteer effort, and I'm so eternally grateful to you, Tim. So thank you for what you did.
I wonder politically, I don't think anybody in power really wants to talk to a journalist. I mean, some of them did, and then they no longer do, like whether you're a cabinet minister, a prime minister, as soon as they get those positions, the wall starts to come up, right? No matter what political stripe it is. But I wonder too about this, without Canadian journalism, without people wanting to really work at every level, we lose Canadian stories. We will be dominated by the neighbor to the south, or to the north if you're from Windsor, but we will be, that's what's at stake, the place to tell those stories that, the Netflix person doesn't want it, and the New York Times person doesn't want it, but we need to know about it. We need to read about it and watch it and listen.
And certainly in smaller communities, that's the case. They used to say that the community paper was like the church bulletin. It was the advanced version of a church bulletin. And people were able to find out what's working in their communities and also what's not working in their communities. But now, many, and I've had the privilege of reading a lot of newspapers from across Canada in my role as on the independent media panel. And a lot of papers are just taking minutes from council and publish them in verbatim. They're not doing follow-ups, they're not attending meetings, because you may have one reporter and a boss that's the editor and selling ads. There's just not those people out there, and that worries me, that's happening. And so our democratic institutions, our democratic processes, no one's holding them accountable. The big papers, I have more faith that there will be some kind of national narrative, but it's the local people. If you didn't cover 905, nobody would know what's going on in 905 Noor. You really, so we need these champions, these someone said, a unicorn, because that are prepared to do that.
There's a question over here.
Questions. I saw 3 hands. And
Okay,
one was
well,
over here.
let's.
Yeah, and I'm also curious if our junior fellows have any questions, but we should go to Joey.
Okay.
Kim, you are at an interesting intersection of Canadian journalism and society here at Massey College. And you and I both know our graduates, put it this way, our junior fellows are very busy. They may not have time to go through the entire book. What would be the 2 chapters you would recommend to a busy junior fellow?
I probably the chapter, am I talking to you or the junior fellows?
A friend of mine.
A friend friend of yours. Oh, okay, I know that friend of yours. I'd probably do the more recent, the chapter 8, 9, and the conclusion. Big media, big stories. That's inspirational. It'll make you want to be a journalist. It'll make you give you reason to get up in the morning and say, yes, what I do matters. And then disruption on all fronts will sort of say, yes, but I'm doing it within a context where it sucks some days. And the conclusion will be, that we have to be vigilant. And in my mind, that, if we're, and citizens, and I'm not just talking to journalists, I want you to know, I'm talking to citizens, because I think citizens have been, maybe as journalists, we've trained citizens to be passive and to accept what we do. But we actually have to be in relationship with our local media. I do believe that, so.
Another question? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim and panel. It's very interesting discussions here, with a lot to learn from and a lot to teach. You have a lot to teach. Now, my question, you make a very interesting point when you say that government has supported Canadian media, and you add that they never told you what to do in your 20 years of work at the CBC. I find that very interesting, because government and media make very strange bedfellows. Because while government does not overtly tell you what to do, they know what levers to press when they don't want to be criticized or when they don't want unpleasantness to come up. And we have seen this in practice during this, what is going on in Gaza and Palestine. We have seen the powers that be press the levers and silence the media. So my question becomes, well, media is under threat because of funding, and maybe the government may be the only salvation. How can media remain vigilant in the face of censorship?
I don't think government is the only solution, trust me. I think that there's a combination of solutions, and I think that most journalists follow principles as to how they operate, verification, train, that kind of thing. And those that don't, well, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. But I think that it's important to remember that to say truth to power, to just stand up. Truth is important. It may not get you a promotion. It may cause problems, but also make sure it's factual. I mean, there's a lot of opinion being mixed in with fact, and about in our mainstream or in our in media these days. And we have to, I think, if we've lost trust, maybe part of that might be why is that we need to remember about bringing in a diversity of voices into our conversations, and engaging the community as well, I think is important.
Another question.
And then can you pass it?
Can I make a remark? Okay.
Can we keep
Yes.
going with?
Okay, we have.
No.
Whoa, okay, Natalie?
So my question is about the award. Many of the organizations that give awards over the years eventually have a bit of a reckoning to decide whether they continue to do it on the same criteria or whether they should change somewhat. The Royal Society has now created a college for younger scholars, and it had to go through quite a bit of a reckoning over its the treatment of Indigenous scholarship and so on. So I'm wondering, did the Michener Award have these sort of moment where it thought that we're not doing it right, or we're not pushing enough, or we're not changing enough, or we should create new awards to respond to particular issues? It's a governance question from inside.
No, so from a governance question, yes, there were discussions along the way, particularly between big media, small media. Should we have 2 Michener Awards? One for small, one for big. Should we have a French? Because we had one of the elephants in the room is that the French, we have so few French submissions for the Micheners. I don't know if it's ennui or what, but they don't value this award. So should we, have an award for them? There's been all these discussions, but it always circles back to this sense of public service journalism is public service journalism. You're making a difference. You're doing something that will change a community, whether it's proper regulations to protect loggers on logging roads in northern BC, or whether it is changing the criminal code to protect to protect the interests of journalists in search and seizures. So they have had the discussion, and they always circle back to it, and it's in the book sort of throughout.
Someone else had a question behind you? Okay, go ahead.
First off, Anna Maria Tremonte, wonderful career. Thank you for moderating this. Kim, fabulous book, incredible contribution. And what I'm hearing tonight, maybe I can offer a different perspective from the Silicon Valley point of view. I actually am really optimistic about journalism. And the reason I say that is, let's go back to U of T in the 60s, and let's remember Marshall McLuhan when everybody was freaking out the last time journalism changed. And it survived. And the reason it survived is quite simple. You said it, truth to power. It's not the masses that can speak truth to power. Now, something's changed, though, and it's the medium. The medium. And when the medium changes, all of the existing authority poles collapse. And you get a concentration that happens. So you got the National Post, Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail. They buy up everybody. This has been happening since Conrad Black started to buy up in the late 90s, remember. So that's pillar one. That old business from the standpoint of structure needs to change. It's got to go away, and that construction that's happening is good. The second major change that's happening is the innovation. The Narwhal is the classic example, but it's not just the Narwhal, the Line, the Substack independent journalists. I mean, there are actually more journalists making money nowadays independently without the majors, but it's still insufficient to keep what I'd call the cohort that existed before employed. So we need a third pillar. And the third pillar, I'm happy to tell you, is the new medium, which is you're going to eventually be asked, I believe, and I'm not speaking just because I have an opinion, I actually built this and it's here. You're going to be asked as journalists to use your expertise in a completely different way. Instead of you choosing and curating the content, you'll be asked to use your expertise in real time to answer the needs of people, individuals, corporations, governments, etc. And your app on your phone as a journalist will allow you to do that. And those formats will be paid. And the amount of money that it's going to create will make the money journalists made before look like a very small amount. So all I wanted to say to everybody in this room is optimistic on journalism, and I'm bullish on everybody in this room.
I want you to explain that last part again.
Yeah.
You're going to have an app that is asking you to explain who's asking you.
Yeah, so it's not me having an app. I have one of them, but
I get that,
just an
but,
example. The structure of it is real-time requirement for expertise. So imagine I own a structure like a paper, okay? And there's a real-time, so in the case of my company, Citizen, we're creating the largest democracy data set there is, period. It's going to be 3-4 orders of magnitude more predictive than Ipsos, Nanos, Transmuse, and the rest. But for me to be able to do that, I need to create people into nodes in that network, and they need to be able to give informed consent for that data set to be what I just claimed. To do that, I need experts to explain in very short bites what the individual needs to know. So for instance, there's a committee, it's about Bill C-18, we're producing a new bill. I can bring the entire country, the entire electorate live into that commission and get them to understand what's going on, and the journalism class will be paid by my company huge amounts of money, okay? More money than there would ever have been in, say, a 1,000-word essay, to be able to give short bits of information in our format when we need it. And then you have a period to respond, 2 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, depending on the service level that's attached to it. If it's longer form, it's longer time. If it's shorter form, shorter time. And so you take all the journalists and you say, here are the journalists in the country. Anybody can sign up to it. They have expertise. They get ranked. There's better journalists, worse journalists. I mean, you're extraordinary. But not everybody has achieved your level of journalism. So, you know, people will be paid as a function of the market value. that they bring. But all I'm saying is there's going to be so much demand for that real-time journalism in different formats, small, tiny formats like 30-second video, 2 sentences statement to comment. This is the future, and it's going to take another decade to implement. But you guys are going to make more money than you ever have.
Okay, so let me just go with this for a minute, because what if I'm newer and I'm going, yeah, but I don't want to answer that. I would like to go on and keep following, what the hell's going on in the green belt, but that's not the information you need. So where's she going to get the sponsorship to do that? What you're talking about is information that you want. What about so many of the stories that we're talking about that got these awards? We didn't know we wanted them.
Yeah.
We didn't know they existed, right? Individual journalists went off and found them and told your company needs to pay attention to it. So I hear what you're saying, but how do you keep that other part alive? Because that's where we learn and grow and really question ourselves as a society where we're going, right?
Well, in fact, this is probably the most important point. What I think in our company, I can only speak to my company specifically, but
no, I'm just kind of
the intention is that the company itself is the exploration vehicle to find those stories. The corporation brings people to, my corporation, whatever it is, corporation, brings together people so that they are knowledgeable about what is up. And so it's not, before, the journalist's job wasn't just to mediate between government and people, it was to curate the agenda. And so you guys brought the stories to bear, you guys identified the issues, you guys told us what was important to know. In the future, that's going to be part of it, but that's pillar one. But there's going to be a whole other group of people who are journalists that are no longer curating. They're strictly responding to a request, much like, to use a crass example, it's like Uber for journalism, okay? If I need somebody to speak about a particular economics issue, I know that I have 250 economics journalists out there. I send it out, you guys accept, and whoever gets it first, or whatever the rules are, is the way you get paid. And it becomes a competitive landscape that generates incredible amounts of money. And this just doesn't apply to my company. This, broadly speaking, is the future of journalism in the Valley.
Do you want to comment on that?
I'm gobsmacked.
That's why Natalie let me have an event here this year. Merci.
Thanks so much, Marie, for that. I have to think about that one.
I think we're almost out of time, but we have somebody here who wanted to comment. I don't know. Was there somebody back there who wanted to make a comment before? Or?
Oh, yeah, sorry, there was, right here. Okay. Cursa, you have a question? Oh boy, I'm just following. Was there anybody else? It appears not.
Okay, over here, and then we'll wrap it up.
One of our journalism fellows. Okay.
Ashley. Ah, yes.
Yeah, no pressure. That's great. Ashley Fitzpatrick. I'm one of the Massey Fellows for Journalism this year. Hi, Kim. This is a fantastic book. I'm on leave, so don't clap for me. Clap for the folks who are in the trenches right now. I just wanted to say I thank you for this book, but the one thing I'd really want to emphasize is it really is an aspirational thing. Like it's no small thing to make it to the level of a Michener Awards, and I think you're right in the sense of saying that we don't, maybe in Canada, celebrate Canadian work and Canadian journalism enough. That's something that I would really underscore. And I'd also, coming from a small province, Newfoundland and Labrador, with a massive geography, emphasize the pullback that's been happening in Canadian media. And while it's great to hear new ideas, the fundamental fact of not having reporters out covering that massive geography, not just in the cities, not just in Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa, but funded to be out in rural areas, areas that are difficult to get to. If you have to drive, if you have to pay $1,000 for a flight from St. John's to Labrador just to get there to begin the work on the story, that's the kind of discussion that I think we need to start really having in Canada of how do we make the work happen when we're contracting to the center. And that's really got to be a big piece of the ideas that are coming forward are fantastic, and I'm really excited about talking about partnership opportunities with some of the folks here, but yeah, I think emphasizing the really serious challenge that does exist that can't necessarily be solved by a startup that might not be able to be supported by a very small community that still needs the work of journalists and journalism. So thanks for this book, and thank you everybody for supporting the work.
And keep your eye on Ashley Fitzpatrick. She's going to have a book coming out soon about, I think, Muskrat Falls, and it's going to be worth your read. So keep your eye out for her. And for a lot of the other young journalists here in this room that are trying very hard to make a living and to make a difference for all of us, and that whole idea of community. We are a community, and sometimes we forget that.
I want to pick up as we wrap up on what she just said, what you just said, Ashley, about aspirational. I think it's really important that the thing about this book not only puts the history on the record, but it allows us to look at that, and it allows journalists coming into journalism and others to go, wow, look what they did. Look what they did. Maybe I can do that too. Look at what they had to go to surmount in order to do that. And
APTN, for instance, in the work it did, and it won the 2020 Michener Award for its work about the child welfare system and why 3 sisters died. That didn't have to happen, but if they hadn't done this, if Colin Crozier and Kenneth didn't do that, we wouldn't know about that. There wouldn't have been changes to the Indigenous family services for young people. There's endless stories like this. There's the thalidomide, the compensation for thalidomide. Goban Mail, Lisa Prest, worked very hard to do that. The tainted blood scandal, think of that. Would we have had a Creever inquiry if it hadn't been for Andre Picard and Rod Mickelberg? Would we have had all kinds of other stories that made changes in our lives and in our policies? Those are important stories. We have to hold on to that. And we have to say, yes, these are important, and we have to think about ways in which we can fund them and go forward.
so everybody get out there and subscribe, please, to One More Thing tonight after you go home.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming, and thank you for your questions. And,
yes, and
Kim, thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria. And also, Noor, I want to thank you, too. Thank
you. You're signing books?
Yes.
Kim will be signing books.
And there is some cheese and some refreshments.